Hi there, this is Eddie Conroy. I am the Associate Director of Institutional Transformation here at the Hope Center for College Community and Justice. And this presentation is on establishing effective relationships when it comes to things like benefits access and support. And I wanted to bring you, as part of my presentation, bring you to one of my favorite places in the world with Loch Lomond behind me, which is from very near to where I grew up in Scotland. So I hope you enjoy a pretty picture while I'm talking a little bit as well. So some of the goals for this session are to help provide an understanding of the implications for state and federal regulations around SNAP, to leverage how much support can be gained by bringing in different allies, faculty, staff, different divisions around campus, as well as building those off-campus relationships, and how you can sort of enhance and expand key partnerships to provide more support for students. So specifically, want to go over a little bit of what sort of was learned in 2020, some of the prior sessions that we have done with all of you, talk a little bit about what basic needs insecurity looks like in the CUNY system, what real college students at CUNY look like. Talk a little bit about the current expanded eligibility for around SNAP for college students that's in place as long as the federal medical emergency stays in place. Talk a little bit about how you can communicate these things with students, and then how pantries can really serve as key hubs for establishing partnerships with community organizations, and then what the next steps look like from here. So the first thing I want to go over just a little bit is what we talked about in the training that we ran in fall of 2020. And there are a couple of key things there, most of which were coming out of the survey that we had published in the summer around what were students' experiences with basic needs when it came to early in the pandemic. And so some key pieces there were that support availability is not the same as use. So we saw a very significant difference between the number of students who said they were facing basic needs insecurities and the number of students who were accessing things that would provide support to them around basic needs insecurities. And a key piece of that was that lots of students didn't know they were eligible for support, or thought that they were less deserving of support than other people, that there was somebody else out there who might need the support more. So a key piece of this work is communicating in as many ways and through as many mediums as possible to students that there is support available to them and that they are eligible for that support. Sometimes, I come from a communications background where I ran communications for UCLA's financial aid office, and sometimes can be frustrating to feel like you've said the same thing 20 times and you're still having to say it again and again. Sometimes that's necessary. Maybe the first 10 times you got the students who were paying the most attention, but often those are the students who actually might not need the most help. So continuing to push those messages out. We talked a little bit about some of those strategies to connect students to the different supports that are available, and different strategies that have been used around the country to try and connect students to supports, as well as some of the barriers and challenges that exist. As colleges went remote, how they have dealt with that. How do you scale up things like emergency aid when you go from small emergency aid programs to all of a sudden CARES Act injecting billions of dollars into the system? How do you continue to connect with students who aren't physically on your campus? So that's just a quick recap of some of the previous training that we've done. And then I want to turn to talking a little bit about what basic needs insecurity looks like at CUNY, and then also what some of our recent data looks like. So this is using our 2018 Real College Survey data, because that's when most of the CUNY system participated. And in that survey, we had about 22,000 students at 19 of the CUNY campuses. And the results are pretty consistent with what we've seen for public universities and colleges, that almost half of students who were surveyed reported being food insecure. Almost 55% were housing insecure, and 14% had experienced homelessness. And it's really something that we talk about a lot that's key to remember as part of this is that if anything, it's possible that these numbers are lower bounded estimates. We think that it's likely that the students who are most in need are also perhaps the least likely to respond to our surveys. We don't provide particularly large incentives. There's a chance of, winning a gift card, but it's only a chance. It's not like every student gets an incentive to respond. And we think that students who are hungry, homeless, or housing insecure are also less likely to have things like secure internet access or the time to sit down and take a survey about something like this. So clearly, from our data that we have here, food insecurity is a very significant issue for CUNY students, and you all wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't believe that as well. That's why it's a really key issue. Some of our latest data, so this is our more recent 2020 report, shows that these things really haven't changed in a significant way when we look at the national data. So for two-year institutions, we found that students, almost 40% were food insecure, 52% were housing insecure, which has actually, was an increase, in 14% were homeless. I think some of the housing insecurity, you see similar numbers at the 4 years, slightly lower on the food insecurity, but interestingly, just as high on homelessness and almost as high as on housing insecurity. Usually there's a bigger difference there between 2- and 4-year institutions. We think one of the reasons for that in this past year may be because so many institutions had to change their housing policies very rapidly for students who were living on campus, suddenly having to move off and struggling to find sort of alternative plans in a hurry. And we know that some campuses were able to do this better than others. So, you see that rates of homelessness were equal at 2 and 4 years, and at 4 years, housing insecurity had increased significantly. We think that that's possibly some of the underlying reasons here. And as we dig into that data, there's sort of some nuance there as well. So of those who said they were food insecure, 39% worried whether their food would run out before they could have enough money to buy more. 37% didn't have enough money to be able to eat balanced meals. So even if they were eating, their diet was poor. 23% did not pay their full utility bills, their full rent, or their full mortgage at some point. So they were having to, end up missing payments or be late on payments or paying partially because they were unable to cover their full rent or mortgage. 11% had to stay temporarily with a relative or friend, or they couch surfed amongst several different people. So again, with that sort of move from on-campus housing to having to change it quite rapidly, it seems quite possible that some of those students captured in that 11% were caught up in that situation. And I think perhaps saddest of all, 5% had left a household because they felt unsafe. So there are students who are having to relocate themselves or who end up housing insecure or potentially homeless because they feel unsafe where they are living. So those two slides give a little bit of the context of, again, why we're talking about these issues. Emergency aid was really critical for students who received it. And you might be wondering, well, we're talking about food pantries. Why are we talking about emergency aid? They're separate. And that's because food pantries don't just serve a purpose of providing food, personal care items. They can also operate as hubs for information. And pantry advocates can use your existing platform as a place where students who are seeking additional resources are coming to lift up the availability of your emergency aid fund, to connect students to that, to say, we're so glad that we could help you with this immediate need right now. If you need additional support, here are some extra things that we can provide. Let's connect you to our emergency aid fund. Let's connect you to the financial aid office and see whether there's room to make changes in your cost of attendance, or if there's an appeal, if you've lost a job or a parent has lost a job. Thinking of food pantries as the first step to connecting students to additional resources can be a really effective way to go beyond that, serving the immediate need. As we say, we have a whole series called Beyond the Food Pantry because we think it's a first step, not the end point in things. So, if you have social media accounts, websites, flyers for your food pantry, adding in additional piece of information about things like emergency aid can be really crucial. For the students who received emergency aid, they told us that it was really vital, and that went for both non-CARES Act emergency aid as well as CARES Act emergency aid, and then the second and what will now be the third pot of funds that have come since CARES. So 76% of students who received emergency aid told us that it reduced their stress. For 73%, they told us that it helped them to afford educational materials. So it's helping them succeed, hopefully helping them succeed in their classes if they can afford to actually buy books and supplies. And 70% said it helped them stay enrolled, which, certainly if you're working and having to advocate for funds for food pantries and things like that, that's a really key piece of information to be bringing to university leadership to say, look, we have some evidence here from the Hope Center that says emergency aid is helping students stay enrolled, and the work we're doing here is helping them stay enrolled. Because at the end of the day, that's a good thing for the students, as well as being a good thing for the university, who, want students to come in and graduate. It also means those students stay there, their financial aid dollars stay within the university. There are, we're helping students with their very human needs. And then there are all of these additional benefits to the students academically and to the institution in terms of the outcomes that institutions rely on to be able to continue to, advocate for funding for the wider institution. So I want to talk a little bit now about the impact of sort of expanded SNAP eligibility, at least in the short term. So this is as a result of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. It temporarily expands eligibility for SNAP for students in higher education. So if the student is enrolled at least half time, as defined by the institution, most of the time, if you're a semester institution, that means 6 units. It can vary a little bit, but generally. And they're either eligible for state or federal work-study program, or they have an EFC of 0 on their FAFSA for the current academic year, then they become eligible for SNAP. And a key piece of that is they don't have to be receiving federal or state work-study. They just have to be eligible for it. And that goes often a long way beyond that 0 EFC metric, where in many cases, students who have higher EFCs are eligible for work study, but there's often not enough work study jobs or dollars to go around. So it's eligible for work study is key, not has to be working in a work study job. And there are a couple of reasons we think this is really important. And that's because among students who were facing basic needs insecurity in our latest survey results, only 18% were receiving SNAP. So, and two-year students at two-year colleges and universities were actually much more likely to be utilizing SNAP than students at four-year institutions. It seems likely to us that for two-year institutions are perhaps a little bit more used to sort of putting the word out about public benefits access, and there's plenty of room for four-year institutions to be doing similar work here. This change in policy is effect until 30 days after the public health emergency is lifted. So right now it remains in effect and will remain in effect for 30 days after that public health emergency is lifted, which certainly doesn't seem likely that that will happen for at least a number of months. This piece of the Act requires institutions to provide outreach to eligible students to inform them that they would be eligible for SNAP. So there's also a key piece of this here that it's sort of a duty on institutions to be reaching out to students and letting them know that they're eligible. And I would certainly encourage doing that through as many mediums as possible. So whether that's through financial aid communications, through communications that you're sending out as a food pantry, putting this information into student portals, something that I have found very effective when I used to have a communications role in financial aid, was asking if we could get a banner that students saw when they logged into their student portal. So it's something that anytime the student is going in there, they see that kind of information. So using as many avenues to get this information out there as possible. And then whilst access to SNAP is absolutely essential, particularly given this expansion in eligibility for students. There's a lot more that you can provide awareness to students about the whole realm of public benefits access. Given that, especially given that food insecurity isn't the only basic needs that students are facing. So SNAP is sort of the starting point that we often advocate for, but then also reminding students about tax credits, particularly if you have like a Viva sort of tax filing support site on your campus or nearby, connecting students to that to make sure that they're getting that support. Temporary assistance for needy families, particularly if you have for parenting students, this can be vital, and the same as WIC benefits for parenting students. Unemployment insurance, we know a lot of students have lost jobs. We've seen that in our study that we released in June of students during the pandemic. About a third had lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and about a third had lost hours. And many had not filed for unemployment because they didn't know that they were necessarily eligible. So reminding students that they likely are eligible for unemployment if they've lost a job. Helping students who might be eligible for Medicaid or enrolling in sort of subsidized healthcare plans through the Affordable Care Act marketplace. If you have childcare available on campus, I know that's often a luxury, but reminding parenting students that it's a support that might be available if you have, C-campus programs or other child support programs on your campus. And then things like LIHEAP, where students can get assistance with their utilities. As I already mentioned, a lot of students have had to go, months or more not paying their full utility bills and might be struggling. And so helping remind students that those additional resources available can be really valuable. One of the most important pieces of this kind of work is ensuring that you're communicating what's available to students. I sometimes feel like we labor the point, but we keep seeing that students often just don't know what they're eligible for and what's available to them. So, having current, telling students what supports are available so that, here are the things that we can connect you to, getting that information disseminated widely to students, often using student groups as well to disseminate that information can be very effective. I did that in my previous role with a student SNAP outreach group, and they actually helped to sort of promulgate this message more widely than if we had been just running communications through the financial aid office. Helping to ensure that the wider campus community of staff knows about these supports. So trying to get this information onto faculty's radar so that when students show up in their office or in their Zoom office hours, as it might be at the moment, they can point them towards resources. And there are sort of some key questions to consider as we go through this next part of the session. And do you have a full picture of the type of supports that are currently offered across your campus so that you can connect students to benefits? Operating as that information hub can be really valuable as a food pantry. And sometimes there are things going on in different parts of campus that are siloed from each other, and trying to work on that cross-pollination of information can be really important. Thinking about, how do I and my team disseminate information to students? Are we hitting all of the places we could be? Thinking about how do you envision this participation of campus community members? So like I was saying, staff, faculty, other offices around campus, how can you pull them in to help disseminate information to students effectively? And then how is sort of information flow managed to keep key pieces of the university, key university divisions informed of new supports that you bring online, both internal to your campus community and external, as we're going to talk about in terms of partnerships, where are the external resources that you might be able to connect students with as well? We know that sort of pantries have the power to inform students that they now are eligible for SNAP, to lift up other public benefits and financial support, whether unemployment, utility support, connect students to one-stop centers and emergency aid if that's something that's available at your campus. and then working with all of those different campus constituencies to continue to support students. The other thing is to ensure that you're bringing in all of the different voices that might be available on campus. And that's why I really push on sort of helping bring in student groups to ensure that you're not missing key voices, to ensure that where you can, you're bringing in outside community groups. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Getting that right mix of partners at the table can really position you to share responsibility and share knowledge and share resources to ensure that as many students are having their basic needs supported as possible and helping those students with their academic success. It also can help sometimes find key community connections that maybe there's a community organization that you as a sort of food pantry director or your staff don't have, but there's a faculty member who works with a community-based organization, and they can make those connections for you. Or there's another senior administrator who holds a relationship there, and it can be an important way to start to build community-based relationships. And then working as well with different parts of campus to figure out how have you learned to support students sort of remotely as we go through continued online education and working remotely. So that brings me sort of neatly into how and why behind have we established and can we establish meaningful partnerships. And this can include internal on-campus partnerships, but I'm going to talk particularly with an eye to building external partnerships. And so the first piece is as you're beginning to build partnerships with off-campus entities, maybe social service organizations, off-campus food pantries who might be able to provide support, that you think about, does that organization see themselves as an equal partner to you? And what does the sort of mutual relationship look like there? Is this a two-way street? Or is it you're just asking the community partner to send stuff your way and you're not giving anything back? So setting up the partnership so there is this mutual, so there is sort of a balance and equity to it. So they feel like they're in a partnership with you, not that you're just taking from them, can be really important. Are there ways you can help them fundraise? Are there supports that you can send back their way? Maybe you can help them find additional volunteers. There can be all sorts of levers that you can use here to ensure that you're building a co-equal bond. And then what does the longevity of the partnership look like in terms of this mutual relationship? So how are you complementing each other? And then in what way is the partnership going to endure beyond, say a project period? And does it need to? So asking yourself, perhaps you have grant funding to establish something, figuring out, is this going to be a 1-year thing or is it going to be a 10-year thing? How do we maintain the longevity of this can be a really key piece, a key question to consider. What does the formality of the bond look like? And do you have buy-in from senior leaders within your institution? It can be really key to build something that will outlive you as the staff member or food pantry director who's established that relationship. It becomes very easy for a strong bond to be built because there was a key relationship between two people at a community organization on the campus, and one of those partners leaves and the relationship begins to dissolve. Or you build a relationship that's established because of a particular grant, and then once that funding dries up, well, we didn't have a sort of continuation plan. Where do we go from here? And then what are you measuring? In terms of, did we have an impact? Being able to collect data to see what the effects are on your students doesn't necessarily even have to be in a sort of formal experimental evaluation sense, but ensuring that you're collecting some level of data about, are we seeing this relationship provide a benefit to our students? Is it providing a benefit to our organization, to the community partner? How has each partner changed as a result of the collaboration? Maybe you can learn from each other as well. That can be part of that mutual exchange of ideas. So there are colleges that are, working to build capacity by, building stronger student safety nets, discovering effective ways to build referrals, serving, the whole individual, and adapting to remote support. So when we deliver this training to you, we'll provide the exact links to the Cardinal cupboard in the shop, but there are a couple of examples of institutions. So the Cardinal cupboard is at the University of Louisville, and it was a partnership with their Commonwealth Credit Union. So they've brought in support from a local credit union who's helping with that. And then the shop is Rowan University. And again, they've built a partnership with Gourmet Dining and with Phil Abundance. So Phil Abundance is a local Philly food charity, and they were able to establish this through bringing in these different partnerships so that they could, set up a really effective and really, in some ways, quite fantastic food pantries by building those community partnerships. And we'll make sure that the links to those are shared at the same time as the training is shared. So what do next steps look like from here? Students, something that I think is hopefully obvious from this little session is that students looking for food support usually have other needs beyond just food support. So connecting them with additional resources, sharing, emergency aid, public benefits, all the things that I've talked about here can be really key. Seeing the food pantry as students' entry point to a whole sort of universe and system of supports can be a really key way that you help students today when they come in with their food needs, and then get them connected to longer term supports. So maybe they don't need to use the pantry in the future, or if they do, it's as a supplement to the other universe of supports you've connected them to. We have several resources, our student COVID guide that again we'll provide the link to, and a college support page that that's provided by Equity, one of our partners. They actually have a student resource page that's specific to New York City. Working with your whole campus community to understand what is available around campus and establishing that sort of clear and caring referral process. So if you don't have the solution at the pantry, hopefully you know somewhere that you can then send the student on to next. We also we have a beyond the food pantry piece, as we call our sort of practical guidance reports on how to implement the new federal guidance on SNAP expansion. And we'll make sure that that's linked as part of this training too, because we've got some written guidelines in there that we think can be really helpful in this process. So those are those resources that I mentioned. Again, we'll make sure you have the links to all of those. I know as part of this session, you'll be doing a live Q&A with Paula Umania as well, so she will be able to answer questions that you all have. Thank you all so much for listening, and have a great day.